Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Xcession Everything Service Management podcast. I'm Daniel Gilby, joined by my co-host Sunil Duggal, and really pleased today. We've got a very kind of specialist session planned for you, where we're going to be talking about risk and compliance and how that affects and impacts all things around service management. To which end, very pleased to welcome to the session Hanna Katargina. Hanna, great to have you with us. Just for the audience sake, if you could perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the background in risk and compliance through your career.
Yeah. Hi, guys, and thank you for having me. It's very flattering, and I hope I will manage to say something not entirely stupid. So, me and my career, I did a lot of things around service management and then about risks and compliance and all the wonderful stuff about regulations in the banking industry. Started many years ago as a typical IT nerd in a basement in a local library, holding everyone's hands when they were trying to operate a mouse for the first time in their life. Ended up working for a Baltic bank, quite a big one, as a senior information security risk officer, which is a fancy name for doing everything information security. In the middle, I was working as a service manager. I was working as a localization manager at some point. I was working as a first line of information security vulnerability process manager in the other Baltic bank. So a lot of management of all kinds.
So fair to say you've got the scars and the battle wounds from a great deal of experience in this space, yeah?
Well, to be honest, it was quite smooth, as a matter of fact. I've always had amazing people around me, and they were very supportive and super patient. So that's what actually enabled me to reach where I am right now.
Fantastic.
Very good. So, Hanna, it's great to have you with us just from my side of things. But let's kick off with perhaps a fairly broad question. So, obviously, everybody in 2024 in the financial services world is talking about DORA as a fairly recent set of regulatory requirements. But of course, the financial services industry has been regulated broadly for a long time. So I just thought maybe that as a starting point, it would be good to get your views on, what is the importance of regulation, risk management, compliance within the financial services sector, and perhaps more broadly outside of that. But obviously, as you are focused on financial services, maybe that's a good starting point. So I guess just to help everyone understand, why do we have regulations? Why is it important that we do?
Well, I am probably one of those not so multiple people who love regulations, because I consider regulations a certain, formalized common sense threshold. So in case you are in financial service, people trust you with their money. And also people trust you with a lot of data they do not want to become public one day. You don't want anyone to know how much you spend on different interesting things in your life. I would absolutely be ashamed to reveal how much I spend on unnecessary things, honestly. And that's why I kind of care about my bank keeping me confidential. And I kind of care of my bank being safe enough for me to trust them with my money, right? And at the same time, we know that some people have really diverse opinions on what is the right way to run IT or right way to run the bank in general. And that's why it's really good to have this, like common ground of a certain kind. And then honestly, every single time we start talking about this common ground, like people like me trying to talk to any kind of outsiders, to the management board, to the first line, to the business services we are supposed to support on this regulatory compliance or information security or anything, I feel like I a little bit fool people to a certain extent, because what we are expecting from them is a common sense. It's something they do in their household every day. They just do not realize they do it. And for some reason, we choose to put it into 5 kilometers of fancy English words call it special names, and somehow convince them it's super complicated. While actually it's a very natural course of things. Like every single time you speak about information security, people expect you to be a deeply technical specialist with very, very special kind of knowledge, with a lot of this expertise of scary kind about DDoS attacks or Log4j vulnerabilities, or I don't know, all these impressive things. But as a matter of fact, if you look at information security, the most important aspects of it, which would probably cover like 70% of use case safety, is keep your important things visible, update your operation system, keep your passwords reasonably complicated, enable two-factor authorization. I mean, it's not complicated, right? It's very, very natural, and it's an everyday level of expertise anyone can manage. And yet somehow we mask it. We use it. We use all those documents full of long English words, and that's how we convince people it's very important and very complicated. And they hire people like me to literally translate those long documents into bees and birds. And that's what I do for life.
I'm sure it's a little bit more involved than that, Hanna. And yeah. But as it relates to DORA coming into could you give us your views on DORA specifically and how you kind of see that? And to the points you just made around, a lot of this is what you might term common sense. But as I think we could perhaps all agree, and it's an old expression, but common sense is perhaps the least common of the senses. So
well, DORA is a great example of this common sense, as a matter of fact, because what DORA requires you to do is essentially decide what is important in your household, figure out what supports what is important in your household, figure out what can possibly happen to those important things, figure out how you are going to stay resilient despite any kind of threats and incidents and whatever can happen. So it's nothing super complicated. It's a very natural set of requirements. They are just worded in a new way. And okay, as DORA is a very fresh regulation, it's literally a work in progress. It may sometimes be confusing. A lot of people right now discussing the what ICT means for DORA, this ICT definition and ICT incident definition, and we are trying to find all the right bits in our existing corporate governance framework which would fit into this definition, because as reasonable people who care about our customers, we already do all this stuff. We just need to rearrange it a little bit and maybe reward it a little bit differently to fit this exact requirements. But generally speaking, again, every reasonable person does DORA in their household every day. Because if you have something important in your household, you have, I don't know, this precious vase from your grandma or something, of course you apply some kind of risk management around this vase. You do not let your cat in the room with this vase, right? This is literally what DORA wants you to do.
So I love the analogy. Like if you've got an important family heirloom in your house, you wouldn't put it on a shelf that isn't really attached to the wall, and then have a cat come in who likes to jump on shelves and so on and so forth. So that's a great analogy. Like you protect that particular object, item, whatever the case may be. So to go the other way from a analogy like that, can you give perhaps a generic or more specific example that's a little bit more technical from within the banking industry? So like be quite specific if possible, so we can kind of see the other end.
What DORA talks about, for example, is a critical and important functions. This is like the core idea of DORA. You need to know what is important, right? Again, you probably know what is important by this moment. You just need to rearrange it a little bit. And then it expects you to think about what can happen to what is important. And that's, again, when we need to translate it from this wonderful, big, gorgeous regulation supplied as a 10 kilometers of English text into words and days for people to actually understand what is expected from their side. And generally, we just need to rediscover the parts of what we already do and make sure it's safe and it's arranged in a new way. So what we do for DORA right now, for example, we verify all the parts of digital operational resilience measures. So we verify, for example, that our business continuity plans work well enough, and we need a new routine of testing business continuity plans. We already have it, of course. We do it all the time. We just need to make sure we will be able to demonstrate a new set of evidence and, report it in this fancy new way. Then again, the TLPT, the so-called threat-led penetration testing. This is what DORA requires, again, to cover those critical and important functions. You test your stuff. Of course, you test your stuff all the time. You do cyber exercises. You do any kind of local exercises guided by local authorities, cybersecurity authorities. In Estonia, we have very involved cybersecurity authorities. We are very well guided from their side. So it's just a matter to reorganize it a little bit. And literally yesterday, we had this big session where we were trying to fit all the different bits and parts of what we do into what DORA calls Digital Operational Resilience Program. And we actually discovered we already have almost everything in place. We just need to demonstrate it to the competent authorities and make sure it happens. That's all.
Can I ask a question, Hanna, about so given that what you're talking about, and I'm sure you're oversimplifying it, but what you're talking about is the application of common sense. Is the regulation challenge more about demonstrating compliance than actually the activities that are required themselves?
Well, the main idea is to make sure you have everything in place. I mean, demonstrating compliance is a secondary step, right? To demonstrate the compliance, to gather the evidence, you need something actually going on.
Yeah.
And this is the main advantage of those regulations for me personally, because I know that quite some people all over the industry, especially in smaller companies and different startups, they very often have those very special kinds of ideas about service management being something overcomplicated, not suitable for a smaller company. And then you just need to tell them that, guys, you do it already. And they're like, no, we don't, because we've seen ISO 20000 and we've gotten pressed and scared forever, and so on and so forth. And that's usually when you start going birds and bees. And no, I'm not oversimplifying things, too, as a matter of fact, because literally last time I worked, I sometimes do a bit of consultancy in this area. And last time I worked with a company which was around 300 people. They did a good job trying to convince me they do not need any kind of enterprise service management because they are not an enterprise. And then again, I start telling them that they do it even in their household every day. And they were like, no, we don't. And I was like, okay, let's talk socks. You have socks? And they're like, yeah, we have socks. And I'm like, you have different kind of socks? And they're like, yeah, different kind of socks for different functions. And then we're like, imagine you have a job interview and you may want to look a little bit special during the job interview. So you need a really good, reliable, very neutral black pair of socks. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then we discuss how they need to go to the barber shop to maybe look presentable. And they're like, okay, this is a third-party agreement. Look, you actually do it. And then we are like, okay, you have the special asset, for example, a tie. You do not wear tie every day. And then you need it to provide this exact kind of service named job interview. And they're like, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then we start talking about service portfolio, like the social life, where job interview is a part of a service portfolio, right? But then there are different parts of service portfolio, and one of them may be, for example, a wedding. And you need the whole white tie attire for a wedding, and you need maybe an even fancier barber shop, or maybe you need to shave your beard off entirely. And I can literally see it starts making sense for people, that it's not about IT, it's not about regulations, it's about what they do every day. It's about what makes sense, very practical, very everyday kind of sense. Because I say, okay, what happens if you cannot find your tie? You cannot find your tie and you have a job interview in an hour. And they were like, yeah, we probably should figure out where my tie is, because it makes sense. And then if we switch from ties and socks to the actual IT assets, and we say that you need to make sure that you keep integrity of your socks, and you're able to find 2 socks from the similar pair, they start actually thinking this way, because precisely this whole enterprise service management is a mindset. It's not IT, it's not people, it's not services, it's not fancy regulations, it's a mindset.
It's interesting I love that example, by the way, and I'm going to start thinking about my socks in a completely different way now, as critical assets for my. Actually, I'm really into running, Hannah. So for me, socks are one of the most important things. But that aside, what's really interesting is that when you look at particularly financial services businesses, but increasingly broadly across every market, we are talking about digital businesses, aren't we? And there is, in some people's minds, almost a divide when you talk about IT and when you talk about digital business. They're sometimes not the same thing. IT is your laptop and your mobile phone and how you log on in the morning. And digital business is something else, right? That happens with customers. But actually there is no divide here, really, is there?
And there isn't, and some people have to learn it hard way for the very first time when they have their phone stolen, for example, because they realize that actually their work emails, their Teams chats are available there now, and there are a lot of solutions from M365, for example, people love to use in mobile version as well. I mean, it's impossible to separate those things, not these days. It's impossible to just say that this part is work and this part is fun, because every single information security person who ever seen the user's logs, for example, for the web firewall, they know people access, for example, Facebook from their working computers. And yes, you can try to eliminate the whole non-working scope entirely, but that will affect loyalty besides other things. It may make you a little bit more safe, but you need always to balance the safety with the loyalty. Because the safest way you can actually process, your data is to just dig it somewhere with no connection to internet. Just take the hard drive out and dig it somewhere in a really, really safe place and immediately forget the location. And it will be very safe there, except availability. So you always need to balance all those 3 things from the classical information security triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But then you always need to keep people in mind, because we always say that people is the biggest attack surface always. And you can have the most gorgeous firewall you can think of. And what if I still can fool the firewall engineer by an urgent call in the middle of the night, pretending I am the CEO, and tell them to shut this firewall down immediately because it interrupts my demo, for example, for a super important customer? Because that was the real case in one of the companies I consulted once. They had the US management and the European development. And the guy in charge of firewall actually got the call in the middle of the night, assuming it's his CTO from the US, because middle of the night, the time zone difference. And the CTO was yelling at him like crazy, saying that he needs to shut something down, the DLP, the protection, data level protection, for him immediately, because it interrupts his demo to customer. So he needs everything shut down immediately. Like, I don't care, I'm going to sign off all the papers tomorrow. Just shut it down immediately. And the guy actually tried, and thanks God there was the 4S control and he couldn't do it. And he tried to figure out the way to make an exclusion for this laptop. Unfortunately, it didn't work because the guy didn't manage to figure it out. And then in the morning, he wrote this dramatic mail to who he thought was calling him, saying like, "I'm sorry, I did my best and I had no idea." And that's how it all got revealed.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, you can trust your firewall. You can have the very expensive and very well configured firewall, but there is always a person behind it. And also, for example, I know that a lot of colleagues of mine, especially male colleagues, because it's still more rather a default option, can get anywhere in the world if they have a ladder and work clothes on them. So they just approach what kind of office they want, having a ladder, and asking someone to help with the door, and they are in immediately.
So what you're saying, Hanna, then, if I'm understanding you correctly, is we just need to remove all of the people, and then there'll be no problem with DORA compliance. Is that sort of a fair summary?
It's not just will be the DORA compliance; it will be no problem with anything in the world. But except, those measures may be a bit more complicated to apply than just the usual set of security ones.
But I have a Tesla, and I can tell you, I would not trust my Tesla to drive me around. So removing the people isn't always necessarily the answer.
Well, it depends on the goal, actually. Because if the goal of your Tesla journey is to be driven safe somewhere to a certain destination, that's one thing. But if the goal of your journey is to let Tesla have fun,
yes, yeah,
a training drive, yeah.
I mean, it's always very important to set the goal correctly to align the expectations.
Yeah.
But Tesla is a good example.
Sorry, Sunil. Sorry, just 1 second. Sorry, just thinking back on sort of the topic we were talking about, DORA, and would I be correct in kind of thinking if you're in an organization which has a lot of robust, mature processes in place around cyber risk compliance from other regulation frameworks, then arguably you're in a good place for DORA. It's just as you've described it, Hanna, you might have to just rearrange a couple of things to show in evidence that the compliance for the specifics, the 10,000 kilometers of long English words that they've used to define whatever that might be. But for an organization that perhaps doesn't have that level of maturity, could you give what sort of tips would you give? And I know we've spoken about kind of like, making them understand how they actually are doing this and that and the other. But what might your suggestions be for an organization that are looking to be DORA compliant, as well as all of the other compliances that they would need? Sorry, Sanna, that's way off what you were going to ask. I apologize.
All good.
Okay, well, there is a sort of easy and cheap way to achieve that if you have enough money to pay for the operational platform. There are those solutions like ServiceNow, like Atlassian, like the other ones all over the market. And usually, if you trust them and you use their built-in flows, they will bring you to a really good place, as a matter of fact. The main problem with those kinds of solutions, from my experience, because I've been through a couple of really dramatic implementations, is that people decide that their processes go first and they try to customize the flows, and they end up over customizing a lot of things. But generally speaking, if you're not so mature organization and you do not have like 100 years of legacy and all those processes that are built this way because there is a very good historical reason of 200 years old, you can actually try to trust the vendor. Because I know that right now, pretty much all the vendors that supply any kind of solutions for operational governance, they actually offer you some kind of DORA package, DORA compliance package. There are unfortunately a lot of offers on the market that say we are going to make it DORA compliant in no time, just like that. And every single information security professional in this world, I guess, has the full LinkedIn private messages with all those wonderful people who promise you DORA compliance in no time. Doesn't work, unfortunately, because people and everything. But if you choose the actual operational platform, which is a different thing, not just a single solution which is going to scan for vulnerabilities, for example, but the bigger things that will allow you to govern the whole enterprise, the whole company you have, and then try to trust the flows to a certain extent, then it may be an easy way for you to understand how things are supposed to work and based on the best practices and all the good things in the world.
So the vendors in these instances for those specific areas, they've done all of the thinking really and said, right, okay,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
we do it. Yeah.
And also they've been through so many implementations everywhere in the world, including the banks and financial institutions of different kinds. So they've learned a lot. And that's why for less mature organization, it may be a working knowledge base, as a matter of fact.
Because DORA itself is quite prescriptive, isn't it? In terms of
yes.
How you classify an incident, for example. How do you ensure that you have the right incident management procedures in place, the reporting protocols. So actually, it should be. I'm not going to say simple, but very possible for vendors to interpret those prescriptive requirements and to build in the correct workflows, as you say.
Indeed. And I know quite some of them actually already offer this kind of packages.
Yeah.
They say if you want to become DORA compliant and be able to demonstrate the evidences for Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4, here you are.
Yeah. Can I just go back to the Tesla, please?
Of course.
Who
wouldn't want to go back to the Tesla?
Just as it's an example, okay, of innovation. I know that Tesla is probably not as innovative as it was once, but as an example, innovation meets regulation. And sometimes there's challenge and friction there, isn't there? And I know, Hanna, from some of your own LinkedIn posts where you've had a conversation, I think, with one of your old CEOs, where he takes a position around actually markets should determine, the way businesses operate, and you come from more of a kind of compliance regulatory perspective. But I'd be really interested to hear how, with your experience, how have you balanced innovation, the speed of innovation, and the ability to actually implement it with a more risk-orientated way of thinking?
Well, the innovations, I mean, all the new fancy things we keep talking about from the technical standpoint, right? They sit on the different level in comparison to regulations. Because the regulations are telling you are supposed to have, I don't know, the asset management in place. Theoretically speaking, no one cares if you're going to sort your assets out manually or you're going to have some super duper fancy expensive AI-based discovery. It can be AI if AI works for you. It can be old good manual asset management if that works for you. Some people still have Excels, and that's something that will never end, I guess. Because sometimes for smaller companies, it does actually work. The most important thing is to have an idea behind it. So I honestly believe that what in this case is more important than how. And speaking about market that should probably regulate to a certain extent certain things, I honestly believe that while it may work for 70% of, I don't know what kind of industries we can think of, it shouldn't be the case for the critical bits, because I do not want market to regulate the place where I trust my money to. I do not want market to regulate. I do not want market to let my hospital fail, to let my bank fail, because human aspect. We are all about humans essentially, right? And while it's kind of okay if your favorite brewery didn't survive, It's sad, okay, you may be really disappointed or, I don't know, go look for another brewery, but it's something you can survive. While if your bank fails, it's all about your money and your data. If your hospital fails, it's again about this very special kind of data primarily and very special kind of service you need to rely to with your life sometimes. So I need to make sure in case I'm getting a surgery and it's one of those robots, it won't get hacked. So I honestly believe, and that's what I told to the guy you mentioned, that some areas actually come with extra regulations because of how much about humans they are.
Well, the service criticality, right? There'd be a matrix for that.
Yeah,
Much
indeed.
like in your, if this server goes down, that's going to cause a massive impact. So that's going to be a high criticality. But if the print server goes down for the small office and, in Alaska, then, okay, that's not so desperate, right? Okay.
And you need to be able to determine it really well because sometimes it's not very obvious. I mean, I did a very funny talk once to the second grade. It's basically 7-8 years old because we had this wonderful initiative a little while ago when you invite different kinds of professionals to schools to talk about what they do at work and so on and so forth. And you need to be able to think in this, like really special way to be able to explain regulatory compliance to 7 years old. And we ended up speaking about dragons and princesses. Yes, because there is this amazing British song, and a lot of people where I come from, they always learn this song on their English class about a dragon that was protecting the palace, and then the princess decided to bake a plum pie, and it killed the dragon. It's my favorite song. I love it with my whole heart. And theoretically, when you need to explain a kid what you're doing in life, you tell them you do security, and they're like, yeah, okay, security is a dragon. And you're like, yes, but no, because look, someone gotta configure the dragon, someone gotta feed the dragon, and we do not want dragon to eat each and every visitor, right? But then someone gotta control the people who control the dragon. And then we need to make sure that we prioritize things correctly. And then I asked them a question. If you have a princess who just fell and scratched her knee, and at the same time you see the dog who is peeing in the king's shoes, what is more important? And they were like, of course it's a princess, because she's a princess and it's important to like go and comfort the princess and, I don't know, do something about her knee and so on and so forth. And I'm like, yes, but what is the significance of those shoes? Because it may happen, for example, that those shoes are a part of a service, which is the king's, I don't know, diplomatic suit. And he needs this to be put on immediately because he's going to have a session where they decide if the war can be stopped. And if he has no shoes, he cannot attend the session and the war will continue. And they were like, yeah, okay, maybe princess can wait. But how do we know if shoes are so important?
Yeah.
And that's when you start talking about services. Because historically, as Sunil already mentioned, there was this idea of separating IT from the business, so to say, and keeping IT in the basement and calling them some weird people in the basement who do weird stuff. And it didn't work. And that's why we decided to switch this model a little while ago and to go the service-minded way, because we need them to actually join forces. Because that's how we know what is more important, the princess or the shoes.
I like it. Yeah. So Hanna, conscious, we've had a fantastic discussion this morning. Conscious of your time, conscious of, not wanting to, because we could talk, I arguably much for many, many hours, I can suspect, around this topic. But just to kind of close things out for the audience, Sunil, Hanna, I'm going to invite some kind of closing comments, and then we'll draw the session to a close if that's agreeable to everybody.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say, which has been so refreshing about this, Hanna, is that you have really taken something which from the outside seems very complicated, right, and made it very tangible and accessible to anybody that has listened. And I would say that if you can successfully explain something like this topic to 7 or 8 year olds, you've got it down. Fantastic.
Thank you so much. It's very flattering. And yeah, this is a kind of experience that really makes you look at what you do from an entirely different angle.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
Great.
yeah.
Okay, well, thanks to the audience. If you made it this far, if you'd like to reach out to Hanna for any kind of risk compliance information, feel free to do so. I think it's fair to say that she is obviously an expert. All right, join us on the next episode soon. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, guys. It was very exciting and a great way to spend the morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanna.
Yeah, bye.